The fair had been open since dawn, and by mid-afternoon the green outside the Duke's manor was crowded with more people than the small village had seen in a year. The smell of roasted chestnuts hung in the warm air, mixed with the sharper scent of horses and trampled grass. Ribbons of red and blue snapped from the tops of tents. Somewhere a fiddler played a tune that was too fast for the heat of the day, and children ran between the legs of grown people with sticky fingers and pink cheeks. Maren Ashwood stood at the edge of it all, holding a small basket of pears against her hip. She was not part of the fair, not truly. She had come to sell what was left from her father's orchard, and she had sold most of them already, and now she was only waiting for the sun to drop a little lower before she began the walk home. Her bonnet was plain straw. Her dress was the color of weak tea. She had mended the hem 3 times, and the last mending showed if you looked, so she stood very still and let the shadow of a tent fall across her skirt. She watched the crowd without really watching. That was a trick she had learned years ago, when her mother was still alive and had told her that a woman could see more of the world if she did not seem to be looking at it. Maren saw the baker's wife arguing with a man about the price of a rope. She saw 2 boys stealing a plum and pretending they had bought it. She saw an old woman feeding crumbs to a sparrow that had gotten too brave. And she saw the Duke. Everyone saw the Duke, of course. That was the point of the fair. It was the 3rd year that His Grace, Alastair Wold, Duke of Renmere, had opened his lower lawn to the tenants and the village folk. He walked among them each year with his steward at one shoulder and his little daughter at the other. He did not smile much, but he stopped when people spoke to him, and he answered them, and that was more than most men of his rank would do. Maren had never spoken to him. She had seen him at a distance, the way one sees a mountain at a distance. He was tall, and he moved like a man who had never in his life needed to hurry. His hair was dark, and his coat was dark, and even in the sun there was something shadowed about him. But it was not the Duke that held Maren's eye today. It was the child. The little girl could not have been more than 5 years old. She wore a small blue dress with white lace at the collar, and her hair had been braided into 2 neat plaits that were already beginning to come loose. She was thin, in the way that some children are thin without being sickly. She kept close to her father, one hand curled into the edge of his coat. When people spoke to her, she did not answer. She only looked up at them with wide, grave eyes, and then she looked away. Maren had heard the story. Everyone in the village had heard the story. The Duke's wife had died when the child was 2. The child had spoken very little since. Some said she had spoken not at all in the years since her mother's burial. Others said she spoke to her father in whispers when no one else was near. Maren did not know which was true, and she did not think it was her business to know. The little girl looked toward Maren's tent. Not at Maren, exactly. At the pears. Her small mouth did not move, but something in her face went soft. The way a face goes soft when a person has not eaten in a while and has just remembered that hunger is possible to end. Maren, without thinking, held up one of the pears. The child looked up at her father. He was speaking to a farmer about wool. He did not see. The child looked back at Maren. Then, still holding her father's coat, she took 2 small steps forward, drawing the Duke half a pace with her. He turned his head, following the pull of her hand, and for the first time in Maren's life, the Duke of Renmere looked directly at her face. His eyes were grey. Not a soft grey. A grey like river stones, the kind that sit under fast water and never move. Maren felt her cheeks warm, but she did not lower the pear. She held it out toward the child, and she said, in a voice that was quieter than she meant it to be, "It is ripe, Your Grace. She may have it if she likes." The Duke did not answer at once. He looked at the pear. He looked at Maren. Then he looked down at his daughter, and something in his face changed, though it was so small a change that Maren was not certain she had seen it. "Cecily," he said. His voice was low. "Would you like the pear?" The child did not speak. She only nodded, once, a very small nod, and reached out with the hand that was not holding her father's coat. Maren placed the pear in the child's palm. The child's fingers closed around it. She did not eat it. She held it against her chest like a thing that must not be lost. "Thank you," said the Duke. "It is nothing, Your Grace." "It is not nothing." He looked at Maren for one more moment. She felt the weight of that look, the way one feels the weight of a hand on the shoulder. Then he inclined his head, only a fraction, and turned back to the farmer. And the little girl went with him, and Maren was alone at the edge of her tent again, holding an empty hand. She let out a breath she had not known she was holding. The sky above the fair had been a mild blue all afternoon. Maren had noticed, in the way that country people notice such things, that a bank of cloud had been building over the western hills since noon. It was still a way off. It would not reach them for another hour, perhaps 2. There was time to close her tent, to pack her basket, to walk home before any weather came. She meant to do this. She meant to leave the fair and be well down the lane by the time the first drop fell. But she did not leave. She stood by her tent, and she watched the Duke and his daughter move slowly through the crowd. The child was still holding the pear. She had not taken a bite. Now and then, when her father stopped to speak with someone, she lifted the pear to her nose and smelled it, and something in her small face eased for a moment. Then she would lower it again and hold it against her chest and follow her father. Maren told herself she was watching only because it was pretty to watch. A father and his little girl. A ribbon of blue in a crowd. That was all. She told herself this 3 times before she stopped telling herself anything at all. The Duke stopped at the ribbon seller's tent. He bent down to speak to Cecily. He was asking her, Maren could see, whether she wanted a ribbon. The child nodded. She pointed. She pointed at a length of pale green ribbon, the color of new leaves. The Duke reached for his purse. At that moment, the wind changed. It was not a large change. A country person would feel it before a town person would. The warm air that had been sitting over the fair all day was suddenly cooler on the back of Maren's neck. The fiddler's tune faltered for half a beat, then picked up again. A ribbon on a nearby tent snapped once, hard, and then hung still. Maren looked west. The bank of cloud had come faster than she had thought. It was over the hills now. It was over the fields. It was over the woods at the edge of the Duke's land. And it was not just cloud. It was the low, dark, purple-bellied sort of cloud that country people did not like to see moving that fast. There was no rain yet. But there was going to be. And before there was rain, there would be something else. Maren opened her mouth to say something, though she was not sure to whom. The sky cracked. It was not a rumble. It was not a growl. It was a single, enormous, splitting sound, as if the great blue bowl above the fair had been struck with a hammer. The sound was not far away. It was directly overhead. It was so loud that Maren felt it in her teeth, in the soles of her feet, in the small bones of her chest. For one long moment, nothing else in the world made any sound at all. Then everything moved. The crowd came apart, the way a flock of birds comes apart when a fox breaks into it. People screamed. A horse near the gate reared. A tent pole gave way, and a whole striped canopy sank sideways into the grass. A child began to cry, then another, then 5 more. A woman near the pie seller's tent went down on one knee and could not seem to rise. A man dropped a jug of ale and did not notice that it had shattered on his own boot. And in the middle of it all, at the ribbon seller's tent, Maren saw the Duke turn. He turned the way a man turns when he has just realized that the person who was beside him is no longer beside him. He had been reaching for his purse. His hand was still in the air. The ribbon seller was on the ground, both hands over her head. And beside the Duke, Where the little girl had been, there was only empty air and a length of green ribbon lying trampled in the grass. Maren followed the Duke's gaze. Cecily had gone forward, not back. Whether she had been startled by the crack of the sky, or whether she had simply been walking when the crowd began to move, Maren could not tell. But the child was several paces out into the open ground now, and the crowd was rushing around her without seeing her. A man's shoulder struck her. She spun. She did not cry out. She only stood there, small and blue in the middle of a river of people, with the pear still clutched to her chest. And beyond her, past the last tent, past the churned grass, past the low wooden fence that kept the fair penned in, Maren saw the thing that made her heart go cold. The horses. There had been a line of 6 carriage horses tethered along the fence, waiting for their owners. The thunder had done to them what thunder does to horses. They had pulled. They had reared. And one of them, a great black gelding with a white blaze, had torn its rope clean out of the post. It was loose. It was frightened. And it had come around the end of the fence and was now moving, at a heavy, panicked, uneven canter, straight across the open ground where the little girl stood. Maren did not think. There is a thing that happens in a person sometimes that is faster than thinking. It happens in the body before it happens in the mind. Maren felt her basket fall from her hip. She felt the strap of her bonnet loosen under her chin. She felt the ground under her feet go from grass to trampled mud to grass again, and she was already running before she had understood that she was running. She ran toward the child. The crowd around her was running the other way. She had to push through them. A shoulder struck her ribs. An elbow caught her jaw. She tasted blood on the inside of her lip. She did not stop. She kept her eyes on the small blue dress, on the small pale face turned up toward the sky, on the pear held against the small chest. Behind her, somewhere, she heard a voice shout a name. She heard it as a man shouts when he has understood, too late, what is happening. She heard it as a man shouts when he cannot reach the thing he loves. Cecily! Maren did not look back. She did not have time. The black horse was close now. She could hear its breath. She could hear its hooves. She could smell it, even through the smell of the fair, the hot animal smell of a horse that is out of its mind with fear. She reached the child. She did not stop to speak. She did not stop to think. She bent, and she caught the little girl around the middle, and she lifted. Cecily was light. Lighter than Maren had thought a child of 5 would be. Maren turned her body, putting her own back to the horse, curling herself around the child so that whatever came would come to her first. She took 2 steps. 3. 4. Something struck her. It was not the horse. It was the wind of the horse, the great heat of its body passing an inch from her shoulder, the flick of its mane against the back of her neck. The gelding thundered past her, so close that she felt the ground shake under her feet, and then it was beyond her, still running, still frightened, but no longer running toward the child. Maren dropped to her knees in the grass. She did not let go of the child. She held on. She held on so tightly that she could feel the small heart beating against her own chest, a quick, frightened, alive beating. She pressed her face into the top of the child's hair. She smelled soap and sun and pear. "You are safe," she whispered. "You are safe, love. You are safe." She did not know she was saying it. She said it 3 times before she heard herself. She said it again anyway. The world came back slowly. She became aware of sound first. The crowd was still moving, but it was moving less. Someone was shouting orders. A stable boy had caught the black horse's rope, somewhere down the field. A woman was weeping. A dog was barking. The fiddler had stopped. Then she became aware of light. The sky had gone darker. The first fat drop of rain struck the back of her hand. Another struck her bonnet, which had fallen and was now hanging by its ribbon against her shoulder. She could feel her hair coming loose. Then she became aware of a shadow. A large one. It had fallen across her, and across the child, and across the trampled grass in front of her knees. She looked up. The Duke was standing over her. He had run. She could see that at once. His coat was open. His hair had fallen across his forehead. His chest moved with the sharp, uneven breath of a man who has just sprinted across an open field. And his face was not the face he had shown to the farmer, or to the ribbon seller, or to Marin an hour before at her tent. His face was the face of a father who had almost lost the last thing he had left. He dropped to one knee in the wet grass in front of her. He did not speak. He reached out with both hands, and he laid one against his daughter's back, and one against her hair, and he closed his eyes for a moment, and Marin saw the muscles at the corners of his jaw move, as if he had bitten down on something to keep it in. Cecily lifted her head from Marin's shoulder. She looked at her father. She did not cry. She only reached out with the hand that was not holding the pear, and she laid it, very small and very careful, against the side of her father's face. Alastair Wold, Duke of Renmere, made a sound that was not quite a sound. It was the sound a man makes when he has been struck in a place he did not know he could still be struck. The rain began in earnest. Marin felt it on her back, cold and heavy and clean. She felt her dress darken on her shoulders. She felt the mud soak up through the knees of her skirt. She did not move. She did not think it would be right to move. The Duke opened his eyes. He looked at his daughter. Then he looked at Marin. "Give her to me," he said. His voice was rough. It was the voice of a man who was holding a great deal inside. Marin nodded. She loosened her arms. Cecily did not want to let go of her at first. The small hands tightened in the cloth of Marin's dress. Then, slowly, the child allowed herself to be taken. The Duke lifted his daughter into his own arms and stood, and Marin was left kneeling in the mud, in the rain, with her bonnet hanging off her shoulder and her hair coming down. She began to rise. He held out his other hand. She looked at it. It was a large hand, and it was steady, and it was open, palm up, waiting for hers. She put her hand in his. He lifted her to her feet as easily as he had lifted his daughter. He did not let go of her hand at once. He looked at her, and the rain fell between them, and the noise of the fair was still coming apart behind them, and for one long moment neither of them said anything at all. Then he let go. "Come out of the rain," he said. He turned, still holding Cecily, and he began to walk toward the manor. He did not look to see whether Marin followed. He seemed simply to expect that she would. And after a moment, because she could not think of anything else to do, and because her knees were shaking under her wet skirt, she did. The manor was closer than she had thought. The lower lawn ran up toward a wide stone terrace, and beyond the terrace was a set of tall glass doors that stood open. A footman was already there, holding a folded cloth. The Duke passed him without speaking. Marin followed. The footman looked at her wet dress and her muddy hem, and to his great credit he did not raise so much as an eyebrow. He only held the door. Inside, the noise of the fair fell away. Marin had never been inside the manor. She had passed the gates 100 times in her life, but she had never crossed the threshold. She had imagined something cold, something grand, something that would make her feel small. What she found instead was warmth. A great fire burned in a hearth at the far end of the room. The floor was of dark wood, polished to a low shine. There were rugs of deep red and dark green. The air smelled of wood smoke and beeswax, and, faintly, of lavender. The Duke went straight to the fire. He set Cecily down on a low chair very close to the hearth. He crouched in front of her. He took the pear, gently, from her small hand, and set it on the arm of the chair. Then he took both of her hands in his and rubbed them, slowly, to warm them. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. Cecily shook her head. "Are you certain?" She nodded. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, and he closed his eyes, and Maren, who was standing in a puddle of her own rainwater near the door, felt that she should not be seeing this. She turned her face away. A woman came into the room. She was older, in a plain dark dress and a white cap, and she moved with the quiet, quick competence of a housekeeper who had served in the house for many years. "Your Grace," she said. "Mrs. Peel." The Duke did not lift his head from his daughters. "Miss Cecily is to be taken upstairs, dried, wrapped, and given something warm. She is not hurt. She is only cold." "Yes, Your Grace." "And this young woman." "And this young woman." He lifted his head at last. He looked toward Maren. "This young woman is to be given dry clothes, a fire, and tea. She is not to be sent away in this rain." Mrs. Peel's eyes went to Maren. Maren stood straighter under the look, though her hair was dripping down her neck, and her hem was black with mud. "Yes, Your Grace," said Mrs. Peel. "And Mrs. Peel." "And Mrs. Peel." "Your Grace." "Whatever she wishes," said the Duke. "She is to have." Mrs. Peel curtsied. She held out a hand toward Maren. "Come with me, miss." Maren hesitated. She looked at the Duke. He had already turned back to his daughter. He was not looking at her. But she had the strange sense, as she turned to follow the housekeeper, that he was aware of every step she took across the polished floor. She did not look back. Upstairs, in a small room that Mrs. Peel called the Blue Room, Maren was undressed by two silent maids and wrapped in a thick dressing gown of pale wool. Her wet clothes were carried away. Her hair was combed out and toweled dry. A fire was lit. A tray was brought with tea and bread and butter and a small pot of honey. Maren sat in a low chair by the fire and stared at the honey pot as if it were a thing from a story. She had not eaten since morning. She ate now. The bread was soft. The butter was fresh. The tea was hot and strong and had milk in it, and she drank 2 cups without stopping. When she had eaten, she sat back in the chair. Her feet were bare on a small rug. The fire was warm on her shins. Her hair was drying in loose waves down her back. She should have felt out of place. She did not. She only felt tired. There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Peel came in with a folded dress over her arm. It was a plain dress of soft grey wool, the sort a governess or a companion might wear. It was not new, but it was clean, and it was warm, and it was Maren's size. "His Grace begs you will accept the loan of this dress until your own is dry," said Mrs. Peel. "Your own dress is being washed and mended. It will be ready in the morning." "In the morning." "In the morning," said Maren. "His Grace has said you will stay the night, miss. The road home in this rain is not safe for a woman on foot. A room is being made up for you." Maren opened her mouth. She meant to say that this was not necessary. She meant to say that she was very sorry for the trouble. She meant to say a great many polite things. What she said instead was, "Is the little girl warm?" Mrs. Peel's face did something that Maren could not quite read. It softened. "She is warm, miss. She is upstairs in her own bed, and she has drunk a cup of broth, and she is holding the pear you gave her, and she will not let it out of her hand." Maren looked at the fire. "I am glad," she said. "His Grace," said Mrs. Peel carefully, "would like to speak with you when you are dressed and warm." He is in the small library. I will show you the way. There is no hurry, miss. Maren nodded. She dressed slowly. The grey wool was warmer than anything she owned. She tied her hair back with a bit of ribbon that Mrs. Peel left on the table. She looked at herself for one moment in a small mirror on the wall. Her lip was a little swollen where the elbow had struck her in the crowd. Her eyes looked very large in her face. She did not recognize herself in the grey wool. She followed Mrs. Peel down a long hall and down a set of stairs and through a door that Mrs. Peel opened without knocking. Miss Ashwood, Your Grace, said Mrs. Peel. Then Mrs. Peel. Then Mrs. Peel was gone, and the door was closed, and Maren was standing in a room that was smaller than the great room downstairs, but that was still, by her measure, a very large room. Books lined 3 of its walls, from floor to ceiling, in dark shelves. A single tall window looked out over the terrace. The rain was falling steadily against the glass. A fire burned in a smaller hearth. 2 chairs stood before it. In one of them sat the Duke. He had changed his coat. His hair had been combed. He held a glass of something amber in one hand, and he was not drinking it. He was only looking at it. He rose when she came in. Miss Ashwood, he said. Your Grace. Please sit. Please sit. She sat in the other chair. She kept her back very straight. Her hands were folded in her lap. She could see the shape of her own knuckles through the skin. They were red from the cold. He sat down opposite her. He did not speak at once. He looked at the fire. She looked at him without meaning to. In the light of the flames, his face was less shadowed than it had been on the lawn. She could see a small scar at the corner of his mouth. She could see that his eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with today. How old are you? He asked. The question surprised her. She had expected him to speak of the accident, of Cecily, of some reward he wished to press on her. She had prepared, in her mind, 3 polite ways to refuse a reward. 22, Your Grace. You live in the village? Yes, Your Grace. With my father. We have an orchard. A small one. Or mother? Dead these 5 years. He nodded slowly. He seemed to be storing the answers, one by one, on some shelf inside his head. You ran, he said. She did not know how to answer that. I did, Your Grace. Everyone else ran the other way. I know, Your Grace. Why? She thought about it. She was not the sort of woman who spoke without thinking. She looked at the fire while she considered. The rain hit the tall window in a slow, steady rhythm. I did not know I was going to, Your Grace, she said at last. I saw her, and my feet went. I do not think I chose it. I think it happened before I chose. He was quiet. He turned the glass in his hand. The amber liquid caught the firelight. That, he said, is the truest answer anyone has ever given me to a question. She did not know what to say. My daughter, he said, or has not spoken above a whisper since her mother died. 3 years, this autumn. She whispers to me at night. She does not speak to anyone else. Not to Mrs. Peel, who has known her since she was born. Not to her nurse. Not to the doctors who have come from London. He paused. She said your name in the carriage on the way up from the lawn. Maren's breath caught. She does not know my name, Your Grace. She heard the ribbon seller say it, I think, or one of the other women at the fair. She said it very small. She said, the Pear Lady. Then she said, Ashwood. Then she went back to being quiet. He looked at Maren then, directly. His grey eyes did not blink. It was the first time in 3 years that she has said a name that was not mine. Marin felt her eyes sting. She did not let anything fall. I am glad, Your Grace. So am I. The fire cracked in the hearth. A log fell and sent up a small shower of sparks. Neither of them moved. I mean to thank you, he said. I do not know how. Your Grace, it is not needed. It is needed. He set the glass down on the little table between them. I have been thinking, on the walk up from the lawn, of what a man in my position is supposed to offer in such a case. Money. A place. A pension. A cottage. I have thought of all of these things, and none of them is the right shape. None of them fits. I do not want any of them, Your Grace. I know. They sat in silence again. The rain came harder against the glass. May I ask, he said, what you do want? She thought about that too. To go home in the morning, Your Grace. To see my father. To take my basket back. He almost smiled. It was not quite a smile. It was the beginning of a smile that stopped halfway. That, he said, is easily done. Then I have what I want. No, he said. You have what you asked for. That is not the same. She looked at him. Miss Ashwood, he said, I would like to ask you something. You may refuse. There is no obligation. If you refuse, you will still go home in the morning with your dress washed and your basket returned. Do you understand? Yes, Your Grace. My daughter, he said. My daughter, he said, needs a companion. She has had nurses. She has had governesses. They have been kind women, competent women, women who have tried very hard. She has not spoken to any of them. I do not know what it is about you. I do not pretend to know. But I know that she said your name, and I know that she is holding the pear you gave her against her chest at this moment, as if it were a living thing. I would like to ask you to come to this house, not as a servant, not as a governess, as a companion to my daughter. For as long as she needs one, you would have your own room. You would be paid what is fair. You would be free to go home to your father whenever you wished. He stopped. He looked at her. He waited. Marin sat very still. Your Grace, she said, I am not a lady. I did not a lady. I did not ask for a lady. I have no learning. I can read, and I can write a hand, and I can add a column of figures. That is all. Cecily does not need learning. She has tutors for that. She needs a person. I have never lived in a great house. Neither had I, until I was 7 years old, and my father brought me here. It is only a house. It has rooms in it. One learns them. She almost laughed. She did not quite. But something in her chest, which had been very tight since the sky had cracked, loosened by a little. I would need to speak with my father, Your Grace. Of course. Of course. Of course. Old. He is old. He cannot manage the orchard alone. The Duke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, There is a man on my estate whose son is looking for work. A good young man, honest, strong. I will send him to your father tomorrow. If your father wishes, the young man will help him with the orchard. He will be paid from my house. Your father will owe him nothing. Marin stared at him. Your Grace, that is... Ugh. That is a practical solution to a practical problem. It is not a favor. It is not a gift. It is what any man who was not a fool would arrange if he wished a woman's mind to be at ease so that she could think clearly about a question he had asked her. She looked down at her hands. "I would like the night to think, Your Grace." "Take the night. Take a week. Take as long as you need." "Thank you." He stood. She stood. She stood. "Miss Ashwood." "Your Grace." He hesitated. It was the first time she had seen him hesitate. He looked, for a moment, less like a duke and more like a man. "Thank you," he said. "Your Grace, No. Let me. Please." He drew a breath. "You put your body between my child and a running horse. You did it before you thought. You did it because that is what you are. There are not many people in the world who would have done it. I do not know how to thank a person for such a thing, but I would like you to know that I am aware of it. I will be aware of it until I die." She did not know what to say to that. She curtsied. It was not a graceful curtsy. She had not curtsied to anyone in years. She was out of practice. But she did the best she could, and he inclined his head to her, and Mrs. Head. Peel opened the door at that moment, as if she had been waiting outside, and Marin went out of the room. She did not sleep well that night. The bed was too soft. The sheets smelled of lavender. The rain kept on against the window. She lay awake for a long time, thinking. She thought of her father, alone in the small cottage at the edge of the orchard. She thought of the child upstairs, sleeping with a pear in her hand. She thought of the Duke, sitting in the library alone, with a glass he had not drunk. She thought of the running horse. She thought of the wind of it against her shoulder. In the morning the rain had stopped. The sky was washed clean and pale. Marin dressed in her own dress, which had been washed and dried, and mended at the hem with a stitch so fine she could barely see it. Her basket was returned to her, with the pears that had fallen from it when she ran gathered back into it. There were more pears in the basket than she had had before. She looked at Mrs. Peel. Mrs. Peel looked at the ceiling. "His Grace," said Mrs. Peel, "does not like a basket to be empty." A carriage was waiting to take her home. Marin asked quietly whether she might walk. Mrs. Peel looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "As you wish, miss. The carriage will follow, in case you tire." Marin walked. The carriage followed at a slow pace, 20 yards behind her, all the way down the long drive and out through the gates and onto the road that led to her father's cottage. She did not look back at the manor. She could feel it, though, behind her, like a large, warm animal that had lain down and was watching her go. Her father was in the yard when she came up the path. He was thin and stooped, and his hair was white, and his eyes were the same brown as Marin's. He looked at her, at the fine grey dress that hung over her arm folded in a paper, at the full basket in her hand, at the carriage that had stopped at the end of the lane. "Girl," he said, "what have you done?" Marin sat him down in the kitchen. She poured him tea. She told him everything. She told him about the crack of the sky and the running horse and the child in blue. She told him about the manor and the fire and the library and the Duke's question. She told him about the young man who was to be sent to help with the orchard if her father wished it. Her father listened without speaking. When she was done, he sat for a long time with his hands around his cup. "He is a good man, then," her father said at last. "The Duke." "I do not know him, father." "A man who thinks of an old orchard keeper before he thinks of himself is a good man, girl. That is not a common thing. You would have me go?" Her father looked at her. His eyes were tired, but they were clear. "I would have you do what you think is right, girl. I have never had to tell you what that was. I do not mean to start." She went back the next day. She walked. The gates of the manor were open. Mrs. Peel met her at the door. The Duke was in the small library. "I will come," said Marin, "if you still wish it." "I still wish it," he said. She began that afternoon. The first days were strange. She did not know where any room was. She did not know how to ask a footman to bring water. She did not know at what hour one was expected to come down to dinner, or whether one was expected at dinner at all. Mrs. Peel, in her quiet way, taught her these things without ever seeming to teach them. A word here. A gesture there. Within a week, Marin could find her own way from the blue room, which had become hers, to the nursery, to the library, to the garden, to the kitchens, and back again. Cecily did not speak to her at first. But Cecily allowed her to sit close. Cecily allowed her to read aloud from a picture book, holding the book so that Cecily could see the pictures. Cecily, on the third day, took Marin's hand in her small hand and did not let go for an hour. On the fifth day in the garden, Cecily said, "Look." She said it in a voice like a small bell. She was pointing at a robin. Marin did not make a fuss. She only said, "Yes. Do you see how red his chest is?" Cecily nodded. She did not say anything else that day. But she had said one word, and that was one word more than she had said in 3 years to anyone who was not her father. Marin did not tell the Duke. She had thought about it, and she had decided that if Cecily had wished her father to know, she would have said it in front of him. It was Cecily's word. It was for Cecily to give. But the Duke knew. He knew because Mrs. Peel had heard from the garden window. He came to Marin that evening in the small library, and he said, "She spoke." "She did, Your Grace. You did not tell me." "It was not mine to tell. It was not mine to tell." He looked at her for a long moment. He did not seem angry. He seemed, if anything, a little in awe. "You are a strange woman, Miss Ashwood." "So my father has always said, Your Grace." The days settled into a rhythm. Marin rose early. She took breakfast in the nursery with Cecily. She spent the morning with the child, reading, walking in the garden, sitting by the small pond, feeding the ducks. In the afternoon, Cecily had lessons with her tutor, and Marin was free. She used this time to walk on the grounds, or to sit in the small library, which she was told she might use as she wished. She read books she had never seen before. She read poems. She read a book about the history of the county in which she had lived her whole life, and she learned things about it she had not known. In the evenings, she took supper with Cecily in the nursery, and after Cecily was in bed, Marin was invited, most evenings, to sit for an hour in the small library with the Duke. She had been afraid of these evenings at first. She had thought she would have nothing to say. But the Duke was not a great talker himself. Often they sat in silence, each with a book, the fire between them. Sometimes he asked her a question about the day. Sometimes she asked him a question about a word she had read that she did not know. He always answered without making her feel foolish. One night, 3 weeks after she had come, she asked him a question that had been sitting in her mind. "Your Grace, on the day of the fair, before the storm, you looked at me. At my tent. Do you remember?" "I remember." "May I ask why?" He was quiet for a moment. He set his book down on his knee. "You held out a pear to a child you did not know. You did it without asking anyone's leave. You did it without expecting anything for it. My daughter has been surrounded, for 3 years, by people who ask her to speak, who ask her to smile, who ask her to eat, who ask her to be a little girl again. You asked her nothing. You only offered her a pear." She noticed. "So did I." "Oh," said Marin. That was all she said. They did not speak of it again for a long time. Autumn came. The leaves on the great oaks along the drive turned red and gold and brown. Cecily learned to say Maren's name. She learned to say yes, and uno, and please, and more. She still did not speak to strangers. But when Maren came into a room, Cecily's face changed, and when Maren left a room, Cecily watched the door until it closed. It was in the middle of autumn that the sister came. Her name was Lady Prudence Wold, and she was the Duke's elder sister. She lived most of the year in London. She came to Renmere twice a year to inspect, as she put it, the household. She arrived one afternoon in a carriage with 4 horses and a great many trunks, and she filled the manor at once with a kind of cold, sharp weather that had nothing to do with the season. Maren met her the first evening at dinner. Maren had, in the last weeks, begun to take dinner with the Duke and Cecily in the small dining room. It was not a grand meal. It was quiet. It suited them. But that night, with Lady Prudence at the table, nothing was quiet. Lady Prudence looked at Maren over the soup. "So you are the orchard girl," she said. "I am Maren Ashwood, my lady." "My lady." "Yes. That is what I said. My brother has told me a great deal about you. His Grace has been very kind." "Kindness," said Lady Prudence, "is often mistaken for other things by people who have not seen much of it." The Duke set down his spoon. "Prudence." "I am only making conversation. Alastair. Miss Ashwood, you must tell me all about your orchard. It sounds so quaint." Maren answered her questions. Maren answered every question that was put to her, politely, briefly, without allowing herself to be drawn. Lady Prudence's questions were like small sharp stones dropped into a pond. Each was harmless in itself. Together they made a pile. On the third night of Lady Prudence's visit, in the drawing-room after dinner, when the Duke had stepped out for a moment to speak with his steward, Lady Prudence turned to Maren and smiled, and said, quite pleasantly, "You do understand, don't you, my dear? That you are here because a horse ran the wrong way. That is all. If the horse had run the other way, my brother would not know your name. You would still be selling apples by the side of the road. Do not confuse an accident with a destiny. It is a very common mistake for girls of your kind, and it always ends the same way." The room, which had been full of the small sounds of a fire and a clock, went completely still. Maren felt her heart beat once, hard, against her ribs. She did not answer at once. She looked at Lady Prudence. Lady Prudence's face was smooth and pleasant. She was still smiling. "My lady," said Maren. "They were pears." Lady Prudence blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "They were pears, my lady. Not apples. If you mean to remind me of what I was, please do me the courtesy of remembering it correctly." She did not raise her voice. She did not stand. She only set down her cup on the small table beside her, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she looked at Lady Prudence without looking away. The door opened. The Duke came back in. He looked at his sister. He looked at Maren. He looked at the fire, which had not moved. "Is anything the matter?" he asked. "Nothing at all," said Lady Prudence, and she picked up her own cup, and she drank from it, and her hand shook only a very little. "Nothing at all, Your Grace," said Maren. He looked at her for a long moment. She could not read his face. Then he sat down, and the evening went on, and no one spoke of pears or apples or horses again. Later that night, in the small library, when Lady Prudence had gone up to bed, the Duke and Maren sat in their usual chairs. The fire was low. The Duke had not opened his book. "You will tell me," he said, "what she said to you." "Your Grace." "Miss Ashwood." She told him. she told him. She told him the exact words. She told him her exact answer. She did not soften anything. He listened without moving. When she had done, he sat for a long time with his hands folded in his lap. "I am sorry," he said. "It is not your fault, Your Grace. It is my sister. In my house. Speaking to a woman I invited under my roof. It is my fault. I am not hurt, Your Grace." "I know you are not." He looked at her then. "That is the part that pains me most." She did not know what he meant. She did not ask. The next morning, Lady Prudence left. Marin did not know what had been said between her and her brother. She only knew that at breakfast Lady Prudence's chair was empty, and by 10 o'clock the carriage with 4 horses was gone from the drive, and Mrs. Peel, when she passed Marin in the hall, wore a look that was almost, though not quite, a smile. The winter came. The manor was warm. Cecily learned to read whole sentences aloud. She still did not like strangers, but she began to speak, in her small, clear voice, to Mrs. Peel, and to her nurse, and once, memorably, to the gardener, whom she asked, quite gravely, whether the roses were asleep. It was in the middle of winter that Marin learned the thing that changed everything. She had gone into the village. She went once a week to see her father, to bring him a basket of things from the manor's kitchen that Mrs. Peel insisted he must have. On this day, the road was hard with frost, and she walked quickly, and she reached her father's cottage in less than an hour. Her father was well. The young man who had been sent from the estate had proven himself. The orchard was pruned. The wood was chopped. There was a new door on the small shed that had been half falling down for years. Her father was warmer than he had been in 5 winters. On her way home, she stopped at the small bakery in the village to buy a loaf. The baker's wife, a stout woman named Mrs. Colt, wrapped the loaf in paper and looked at Marin carefully. "Miss Ashwood," said Mrs. Colt. "Might I ask you something?" "Of course, Mrs. Colt." "Do you know what His Grace did, this last month, for the widow Harrow?" Marin shook her head. Mrs. Colt lowered her voice, though there was no one else in the shop. "Widow Harrow's boy. You know the one. The small lame lad. He was set to be sent to the workhouse when his mother could not pay the rent. His Grace heard of it. I do not know how. He does not come into the village often. But he heard. And he sent his steward, quietly, in the evening, with money for the rent, and with a letter that said the boy was to be apprenticed to the estate's carpenter when he was old enough, and until then he was to be given lessons at the manor school with the tenants' children. He did not tell the widow it came from him. The steward said only that a friend of the family had arranged it. Widow Harrow does not know his name to this day. But I know. My husband knows. The steward's wife told my sister-in-law." Mrs. Colt paused. "I thought you should know, miss. There is a kind of man who does that sort of thing and speaks of it, and there is another kind who does it and does not. His Grace is the second kind." Marin stood in the small bakery with the warm loaf against her chest. She did not say anything for a moment. "Thank you, Mrs. Colt," she said at last. "Thank you for telling me." She walked home slowly. She did not feel the cold. The road stretched before her, white with frost, and the trees on either side were bare against the pale sky, and somewhere a crow called, and she walked with the loaf of bread against her chest and thought about a small lame boy she had never met, and about a duke who did a thing in secret and did not put his name on it. She did not tell the duke that she knew. She did not want him to think she had come looking for reasons to think well of him. It was not for her to make him uncomfortable about a private kindness. But something in her had shifted. She could feel it. It was as if a door in her chest, which had been standing slightly open all these months, had quietly closed. Or perhaps opened. She was not sure which. Winter turned towards spring. The snowdrops came up along the drive. The days grew longer by minutes. Cecily learned to skip. It was in early spring that Lady Prudence came back. She came without warning. She arrived one afternoon in her carriage, unannounced, and swept into the great hall with the air of a woman who has decided that something must be settled. Marin was in the garden with Cecily when she came. She did not know Lady Prudence had arrived until she came in through the terrace doors and saw the trunks in the hall. Cecily saw them too. Cecily stopped in the doorway. She looked up at Marin. Her small hand tightened around Marin's fingers. "It is all right," Marin whispered. "Come. Let us go up and change for dinner." At dinner, Lady Prudence was pleasant. Too pleasant. She spoke of London. She spoke of a young lady named Miss Fenwick, whose father was an earl, whose fortune was very large, whose manners were very fine, whose face was... Lady Prudence, exact word, angelic. She spoke of Miss Fenwick for a great while. She spoke of Miss Fenwick until it became clear to everyone at the table, including Cecily, that Miss Fenwick was a person Lady Prudence believed her brother should marry. The Duke did not answer. He drank his wine. He cut his meat. He did not look at Marin. After dinner, Lady Prudence asked Marin to sit with her in the drawing room. The Duke had been called away by his steward. Cecily had gone up to bed. Marin sat because she did not know how to refuse. Lady Prudence poured tea. She handed a cup to Marin. She sat opposite her. "My dear," said Lady Prudence, "we must speak plainly." Marin waited. "You have done my brother a great service. I do not deny it. My niece is a different child than she was a year ago. I see it. I am not blind. And I am not ungrateful. But you must understand, you must, my dear, that a duke cannot marry a girl who sold pears at a fair. It is not done. It has never been done. And if it were done, it would ruin him. It would ruin Cecily. She would grow up in a house that no one visited. She would never make a good match herself. She would carry, all her life, the shame of a mother who... Lady Prudence paused. Who was not what she should have been. Marin held her cup. She looked at the tea. It was very still. "My lady," she said, "His Grace has not asked me to marry him. But he thinks of it. Do not tell me he does not. I know my brother. I have seen the way he looks at you. He is a man of duty, and he is fighting himself. I am asking you, one woman to another, to be the one who is sensible. Leave. Go home to your father. Take a purse from me, a generous one, I promise you, and go. You will save him. You will save Cecily. You will save yourself the pain of watching a good man destroy himself for you." The clock on the mantel ticked. The fire cracked. Marin did not move. She thought for a moment of the small lame boy in the village. She thought of a duke who had done a thing quietly and had put no name on it. She set her cup down on the small table beside her. She stood. "My lady," she said, "I thank you for the tea. You will consider what I have said?" "I have considered it, my lady. I do not accept the purse. Miss Ashwood." "Good night, my lady." She curtsied. She did it properly this time. Months of watching Mrs. Peel had taught her how. She walked to the door. She opened it. She went out. She did not sleep that night either. She sat by the window of the blue room and watched the moon on the drive. She thought about many things. She thought about her father. She thought about Cecily. She thought about the Duke. In the morning, at breakfast, she asked Mrs. Peel, quietly, whether His Grace could spare her a few minutes in the small library. He came. He looked tired. He had not slept much either, she thought. "Your Grace," she said, "I must tell you what your sister said to me last night." She told him. All of it. The purse. The advice. The words about ruin. She told him without softening. She told him because she had decided, in the long hours of the night, that if he was to make a choice, he was to make it in the full light, with no secrets between them. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she was done, he sat for a very long time. Then he stood. "Wait here," he said. He went out. She waited. She did not know how long. Perhaps an hour. Perhaps 2. She sat by the fire and watched the flames. When he came back, he came alone. "My sister," he said, "is leaving. She will not return to this house until she is invited. That may be a long time. Your Grace, would like to say something to you, Miss Ashwood. May I?" "Yes." He sat down opposite her. He looked at his hands. Then he looked at her. "On the day of the fair," he said, "before the storm came, I stood at your tent, and I looked at you, and I felt something I had not felt in 3 years. I felt that I had seen a person. Not a face in a crowd. A person. I did not know what to do with the feeling. I put it away, because I had learned to put such things away. And then the sky cracked, and my daughter was in the middle of a running horse path, and you ran toward her when no one else in the world did. And I understood, standing in the rain with my child in my arms, that the feeling I had put away had been correct. I have been putting it away every day since, because I have been afraid. Of many things. Of what my sister said last night. Of what people will say. Of what it would cost you. Of what it would cost Cecily if ever wrong." He paused. She did not move. "I have decided," he said, "that I am no longer going to put it away. Your Grace, I am not asking you for anything, Miss Ashwood. Not tonight. Not tonight. Not this week. I am telling you what is true. You may do with it what you wish. You may stay in this house as Cecily's companion for the rest of your days, and I will not speak of it again. Or you may leave, and I will send you home with every honor I can give. Or—" He stopped. He took a breath. "Or you may, someday, when you are ready, tell me that you have felt something too. If you have." Murren looked at him. The fire cracked. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly. Maren felt her own heart under her ribs, the slow, steady beating of it, the small, warm animal of her own life. She thought about the day of the fair. She thought about the pear in a small hand. She thought about the running horse and the wind of it on her shoulder. She thought about a boy she had never met, in a cottage in the village, who had a place at the manor school because a man had done a thing quietly and put no name on it. She thought about a little girl who now said, once, on a spring morning, "I love you," in a voice like a small bell. "Your Grace," she said. She stopped. She began again. "Alistair." His head came up. "I have felt something too." He did not move. He did not speak. He only looked at her, and the grey of his eyes was not the grey of a river stone anymore. It was something warmer. He reached out his hand across the space between the chairs. He did not stand. He did not come to her. He only opened his palm. She looked at it. She thought of another palm, held out on a wet lawn, in the rain, months and months ago. She put her hand in his. He did not pull her toward him. He only closed his fingers around hers, slowly, one at a time, as if he were memorizing the shape of them. He held her hand for a long time. He did not let go. The days after that were quiet. Nothing was announced. Nothing was hurried. There was no grand ball, no ring produced in front of witnesses. There was only, day by day, a slow and steady changing of the shape of things. Maren was consulted about the running of the house. Her opinion was asked at dinner. Her chair, at the small dining table, was moved a little closer to the Duke's. Cecily noticed. Cecily said nothing. But Cecily, one evening, climbed into Maren's lap in the drawing room and fell asleep there, with her cheek against Maren's shoulder, and the Duke sat in the chair opposite and watched them, and Mrs. Peel, coming in with the tea tray, quietly set it down and quietly went out again without speaking. In the late spring, the Duke asked Maren, in the small library, on a rainy evening much like the first, whether she would marry him. She said yes. There was a small wedding in the chapel on the estate, with only her father, and Mrs. Peel, and the steward, and Cecily, and a few of the tenants who had known Maren since she was a child. Cecily wore the pale green ribbon in her hair, the one from the fair, that her father had bought for her at last on a market day in the village and given to her without ceremony. Maren wore a dress the color of new leaves. Her father cried. He did not try to hide it. A year passed. Then another. On the anniversary of the fair, 3 years to the day since the sky had cracked over the lower lawn, Maren stood at the window of the small library and looked out over the terrace. The lawn below was quiet. There was no fair this year. The fair had been moved to the meadow beyond the woods, where there was more room, and where no horses were tethered near the crowd. She heard the door open behind her. She did not turn. She knew the sound of his footstep. He came to stand beside her. He did not speak at once. He was holding something in his hand. She looked down. It was a pear. She looked up at him. "Where did you get that?" she said. "From the orchard. Our orchard. Your father's tree. He sent it up this morning with the boy." He held it out to her. She took it. It was heavy and cool in her palm. It smelled of sun and rain and the old dirt of the orchard where she had grown up. "Do you remember," he said, "what you said to me, that first day, when you held one of these out to my daughter? I said it was ripe. You said, 'She may have it, if she likes.' Oh, I remember. I have thought about that sentence a great deal in the years since. It was the first sentence anyone had spoken to my child in a long time that did not ask anything of her. It only offered." She looked at the pear. "I did not know I was doing anything," she said. "I know. That is the reason it worked." They stood at the window. The garden below was full of early summer. Somewhere in the house, they could hear Cecily laughing, a real laugh, loud and free, the laugh of a child who had come back into the world. Maren reached out and took his hand. He did not look at her. He only closed his fingers around hers, one at a time, the way he had that first evening in the small library. He held her hand while they watched the light move across the grass. Outside, a small wind stirred the leaves of the great oaks along the drive, and somewhere far off a bell rang, and the world went on with its quiet business, and inside the house, in a warm room with a low fire, a man and a woman stood together at a window and held a pear between them, and neither of them needed to say what it meant, because they both already knew. She had run toward his daughter when no one else would, and in doing so she had run, without knowing it, toward the rest of her own life.